I'm Fiona Fraser, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the fourth webinar in this series this year. Just before we welcome the presenters, what I'd like to do is just remind you of the British Society of Soil Science, do a bit of an introduction. So the Society is an established organisation with an international membership, and we're committed to bringing together not just people in the academic sphere, but also people who implement soil science in industry and those people who are frankly just interested in our particular field of study. The Society looks to host 10 of these webinars per year. Like I said, this is the fourth one, so you can find previous editions on the Society website. They're stored on the YouTube channel. And so just before we begin today's webinar, I've got some basic housekeeping to run through. Like the automated voice said, everyone is muted for the moment, and we will take questions, but if you could put those in the question chat, which is on the top right-hand side of your screen, so click in there. You can add those throughout the presentations, and we'll come back to them at the end. It's possible that you'll get some answers as we go through via text, but we'll come back to them verbally at the end as well. Please get them in by 10:50, and we will try to go through as many as possible. Also, we've got some basis points and NROSO CPD points today. So if you're registered with either of those organisations, please get in touch with us at the end of the seminar and we can sort you out with the details of that. Also, please be aware that we are recording the presentation today, so just be mindful of that. So today's webinar is in partnership with Soil Use and Management, which is one of the Society's journals, and it publishes novel research in soil science or soil-focused research with agricultural science and environmental science, but also with policy aspects. So at this point, I'm going to introduce you to the comparatively new Editor-in-Chief, Professor Leo Condren, and he's going to provide some details about the journal and an overview of the webinar. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Leo.
Thank you, Fiona. Welcome, everyone. And it's a great pleasure. This is the second occasion that I've had to begin one of these seminars that's focused on soil use and management. And as you can see on the slide, we celebrated our 40th anniversary last year, and I took over as the Editor-in-Chief at the beginning of 2025. So as Fiona says, I'm still relatively new to the job. And one of the first things that we did when I took over as the Editor-in-Chief was to revise, just reconsider and revise our aims and the scope of the journal. And I think the speakers today illustrate, even though Lisa's paper or Professor De Bruyn's paper was actually published before I took over as the editor, they do actually illustrate the ways that we're going in terms of the journal. But the journal is very much focused. I mean, I always say this, it's very much the label says it all. It's not a general soil science journal, unlike European Journal of Soil Science, which covers all aspects of soil science. Soil use and management does cover soil use and management. So it's going to be focused on various aspects of that. But one of the things that we're very keen to do is to explore new areas or expand into new areas. And this is really where Lisa's talk comes in, and also Olivia's talk as well, because Lisa's talk is really about that sort of policy and implementation, how we get the science into what actually happens in practice. And it's an area that we're very keen to expand into, and we are getting some more submissions, and we're actually having to recruit some more associate editors in that respect. In respect to Olivia's work, I think afforestation or reforestation is very much a part of landscapes in many parts of the world these days. As you can see behind me, it's very important in New Zealand, and it's in a lot of cases it is one of the objectives is of afforestation, but a major objective is carbon sequestration. But what actually gets missed out or is not adequately described is actually the impact on actually soil and soil carbon in particular. So that's going to be very, very interesting. So Fiona, I'm very keen to let the speakers get on with the job. Just to mention that we when we were selecting these manuscripts, we didn't go on matrix. We didn't really. That was part of the deal. But the main thing was to select some manuscripts. The deputy editors, we selected the manuscripts based on what we thought illustrates or highlights the areas that we want to do. So I'll leave it at that, Fiona, and then you can continue. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Leo. You're right. Everybody's here to see the presenters. So I just want to quickly introduce our first presenter. So this is Dr. Olivia Azevedo. So Olivia is a soil science at Forest Research UK. She's working on quite a lot of DEFRA-funded research on soil sustainability and forest ecosystem health. So currently her work focuses on the microbial communities, so bacteria and fungi, that drive soil function across land use types, including agroforestry, short rotation forestry, and hedgerows. So she quite frequently uses metabarcoding and eDNA approaches to link that microbial community composition to environmental drivers. So her broader research interests lie in understanding the long-term below-ground consequences of land use change, including the role of soil structure, carbon dynamics in maturing woodland systems. So over to you, Olivia.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everyone. This talk is about something I spent a lot of time during my PhD looking in the field and in the lab, but that often gets overlooked in climate policy discussions, and that's what actually happens underground when you plant a woodland. So you can see on the right-hand side a photograph of one of the macro aggregates we work with. That lumpy structure you see there, just a few millimeters across, is actually doing a huge amount of work in terms of locking carbon away in the soil. But I'll get back to those in a minute. Next, please. So here's the roadmap for the next 20 minutes. We'll start with why this actually matters from a policy perspective, and move on to the 3 research questions we were trying to answer, then the study design, and then I'll take you through the 3 main results in turn. I'll finish with what I think are the practical take-homes for land managers and carbon accountants. Next, please. So deforestation contributes to roughly 12% of global CO2 emissions. Soils globally store around more than triple the amount stored in all above ground vegetation combined. So when we talk about forest creation as a climate solution, the below ground story is just as important as the trees themselves. Here in Scotland, the government has committed to expanding woodland cover to 21% of the country's land area by 2032 as part of its net zero strategy. That means potentially a lot of the land that was previously under pasture or arable is going to be planted with trees over the coming decade. But here's the knowledge gap that motivated the study. We know that from the literature that woodland creation increases soil carbon. What we don't know well is how that carbon is distributed through the soil profile, how it changes over time across a full successional sequence, and whether the physical structure of the soil, which we often use as a proxy for carbon health, what is actually telling us, and if it's telling us anything useful. Next, please. So our three research questions mapped onto three broad themes. First, how does woodland creation affect soil organic carbon stocks, and does that vary with age of the woodland? We expected soil organic carbon to increase with age, but we wanted to understand where in the soil profile those gains were occurring. The second was how does woodland age influence the way carbon is distributed within water-stable aggregates? We predicted that older woodlands would show greater carbon enrichment across aggregate size classes. Third, does mean weight diameter, the standard index of aggregate stability from wet sieving, actually tell you anything about carbon stocks in a woodland system? Mean weight diameter is the workhorse metric for aggregate stability in agricultural research, where it correlates strongly with soil organic carbon. But nobody really had thoroughly tested in a long-term woodland succession context. We expected it would work as well, but it didn't. Next, please. The study was conducted across central lowlands of Scotland as part of the Woodland Creation and Ecological Networks project, WREN. You can see the site distribution on the map spread across the Midland Valley, all on brown earths to control for soil type variation. We grouped our 5 successional stages: pasture as a reference, stand initiation at 30 years or younger, stem exclusion from 31 to 80 years since planting, understory reinitiation from 81 to 160 years, and old growth / ancient woodland at 250 years and older. Next, please. So this diagram is really to show what these stages would look like, from grass to a single layer young stand, through a closed canopy competitive stage, via increased stand complexity and understory growth to the complex multi-layered structure of ancient woodland. From the top of my head, dominant tree species for this study were birch, sycamore, ash, and oak. All woodland patches had been established on former agricultural land, and we restricted, like I said, soil type to Canby soils. Next, please. So if you pick up a handful of healthy soil and look closely, you'll see it's not a uniform powder. It's made up of small crumbs and clumps of different sizes. Those are aggregates. They form when soil particles are bound together by fungal threads, fungal hypha, root secretions, and decomposed organic matter. The size and stability of those crumbs tells you a lot how healthy the soil is, and as our work shows, how much carbon is holding. The image you see of those the four images on the left shows our physical separation of aggregates. We use wet sieving through nested sieves of at 2000 to 50 and 53 micrometers, giving us four size fractions, which are the large macro aggregates, small macro aggregates, micro aggregates, and a silt and clay fraction. The macro aggregates have a very rough, porous surface, and the silt and clay fraction looks almost granular by comparison. Next. Oh, yeah. And I'll draw your attention to, sorry, just one before. Yeah, I'll draw your attention to the large macro aggregate, which disappeared from its fine. So you saw initially, you can see clearly a root fragment sticking out, and the heterogeneous surface structure that make these the most dynamic pool in terms of carbon response. Next, please. Okay, right, on to the results. The first and perhaps most policy relevant finding is about soil organic carbon stocks. Mature woodlands contain around 100% more soil carbon than adjacent pasture systems. That's a very substantial increase. We're talking about a difference of 40 tons of carbon per hectare. But here's the crucial detail. When you break down by soil layer, you can see very clearly that essentially all the increase is happening in the organic surface layer, the purple boxes in the graph. The mineral soil layers are statistically identical across all groups and between woodland and pasture. The organic layer, which is absent from pastures, it's a new layer that develops as the woodland matures, and it contributes to 37 to 42% of total woodland carbon stocks in older stands. There is also an interesting non-linear pattern. So soil organic carbon appears to drop slightly during the stem exclusion stage, which is the 31 to 80 years since planting. That's not statistically significant in this case, but it's consistent with what we expect when trees are in intense competition and allocating a lot of carbon above ground. The stocks then recover strongly in the older age classes. So the gains in terms of carbon accumulation are confined to the surface. Their carbon gains are surface confined. Next, please. From looking at carbon at the soil layers, we now look at how carbon is distributed within the aggregates themselves. Woodland age has a large effect on aggregate carbon, and the largest aggregates show the strongest response. Ancient woodland macro aggregates hold more than twice the carbon of those in pasture. Macro aggregates are the most sensitive fraction to land use change because they form directly around fresh organic inputs. There's an interesting pattern in the 31 to 80 years since planting. Carbon is unusually it's uniform in its spread across all four size classes. We read this as a transitional phase. The soil is actively still reorganizing itself and hasn't yet settled into a pattern you see in the older stands. In the oldest woodland, macro aggregates remain dominant, but the finest fraction also becomes carbon rich. Those are the tan beige color boxes. So this enrichment of the finest fraction, it's a signature of a second stabilization mechanism developing alongside the first, carbon bonding directly to mineral surfaces rather than being physically enclosed in the aggregates. So two parallel processes, not one replacing the other. Next one, please. Result 3, mean weight diameter was significantly affected by woodland age, but only in the surface soil, and the relationship is non-linear. Aggregate stability peaked in the 81 to 160 year stands, and crucially, ancient woodland at 250 plus was not significantly different from pasture. So stability doesn't simply increase with age. When we tested a bean weight diameter as a predictor of carbon, it failed completely, and that matters because mean weight diameter is a standard aggregate stability metric in agricultural research, where it correlates strongly with soil organic carbon. It works in those systems because we think fresh organic inputs build macro aggregates, and those macro aggregates protect carbon. So the relationship is very direct. In mature woodland, that coupling or that link between the two breaks down. Instead, carbon becomes stabilized through chemical bonds to mineral surfaces, independently of aggregate size. Macro aggregates remain important, an important carbon pool in forest systems, but they are not. They are no longer the whole story. Next, please. So, drawing all of that together in a discussion manner, 4 themes stand out. First, the organic layer really is the key mechanism, not mineral soil buildup. Second, the non-linear trajectory matters. If you're monitoring a newly planted woodland and you don't see carbon increasing linearly with age, that's not a failure. It might just be the stem exclusion stage. Third, the aggregate carbon findings are consistent with the broader literature on macro aggregate dynamics. What's novel here is that the long chronosequence and the fraction-specific resolution across depths. And last, mean weight diameter can't be used as a proxy for carbon in mature woodland systems. It works well in agricultural soils where physical aggregation and carbon storage are tightly tied through fresh organic inputs. In forest soils, that connection progressively breaks down as biochemical stabilization pathways take over. The metric is not flawed. It is simply being asked to do a job it was never designed for. And next slide, please. So for land managers and policymakers, I'd highlight 5 things. One, protect the organic layer. Anything that disturbs or removes the developing organic horizon will reverse carbon gains from afforestation. This layer is fragile and irreplaceable on any management timescale. The second is carbon accounting frameworks need to explicitly include organic horizons. If you're only sampling mineral soil, you are missing the dominant pool. The third, don't expect a linear carbon accumulation. Soil organic carbon trajectories are successional stage dependent. And a drop here and there is not unusual. 4, don't use mean weight diameter as a standalone proxy for carbon in woodlands. The data simply don't support specifically in mature woodland systems. Number 5, ancient woodland is irreplaceable. So ancient woodland stores the most carbon and took centuries to develop that capacity. Once cleared, it cannot be recreated on any policy timescale. And next one, please. Yeah, the conclusions is almost a repeat. Woodland creation increases soil organic carbon stocks almost entirely by organic layer development. Carbon gains are absent from mineral layers. All gains are surface confined. Woodland age has a large effect on aggregate carbon, with macro aggregates showing the strongest and the most consistent response across all age classes. Mid-age stands show a unique, even distribution of carbon across aggregate classes as a transitional structural signature. Mean weight diameter is not a significant predictor of soil organic carbon in these systems. And in the oldest stands, the silt and clay fraction becomes notably enriched, particularly at the surface, suggesting 2 parallel stabilization mechanisms operating simultaneously. And next, please. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions at the end. And if you'd like to look at the methods or the findings in more detail, the paper is available open access in soil use and management. The QR code will take you there. My shout out to my co-authors that are listed on the screen and the field and lab teams whose names appear below. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. That's a really, really interesting and informative talk. So as Olivia said, if you've got questions, please put them in the question thread on the top right-hand corner of your screen. Otherwise, I'm going to have to come up with all the questions, and it's probably not something that everybody wants to sit through. So I'm now going to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Lisa Lovely de Bruin. I'm sorry, Lisa. She's an associate professor at the School of Environmental and Rural Sciences at the University of New England in Armadale, Australia. So she's up very late tonight. So again, lots of questions, and reward her for her effort. She uses both qualitative and quantitative research with participative action research models for investigating landholders' understanding of soil health, and then the implications of that for monitoring land condition. So her research focuses on farmers' understanding of soil health and soil information seeking behaviours to improve how we share soil information and build genuine partnerships with land managers that will in turn lead to actionable knowledge. So that research will contribute to the monitoring of land condition for sustainable land management and soil use. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you very much. So I would like to acknowledge before I start that I'm actually speaking today from the country of the Anawan people, who are the traditional custodians upon which the land of the University of New England stands. My talk was actually a paper I wrote with Associate Professor Katrine Prager, who's here today from the University of Aberdeen. And I visited her as part of my study leave in 2023 through the UK. So the paper actually involved talking to, 40 people working in this area, looking at their relationship with the soil repositories, both here in Australia and the UK. And Katrine was very pivotal in the drafting of the first outline of this paper, which we managed to capture my thoughts and reflections after 5 weeks travelling around the UK and talking to various people over that time. And we actually sat down in the gardens of the University of Aberdeen to discuss that. I will mostly focus today on Australia, but I recognise that there are very strong similarities between Australia and UK's journey in making soil data and information useful and usable. So, next slide. Thank you. Sorry. I was trying to turn it myself. Next slide. Thanks. Yeah. So why do we need soil information? And I think in recent years, I meant the one before. Sorry. Yeah. In the UK and Australia, there's been a lot of activity in policy documents to emphasise the how do we improve the state of the soil, and also to increase adoption of sustainable soil management practices. In both instances, the sustainable management of soil has been linked to that improved measurement and monitoring of soil. And interestingly, just last year in the World Soil Day theme, it was about caring for soils, measure, monitor, and manage. And that emphasis has been placed squarely on getting accurate soil data and information in understanding soil's characteristics and supporting information informed decision-making on sustainable soil management for food security. But one of the things I don't think they emphasised as much was how do we connect people more closely to the soil information they actually need. Next slide, please. So in my journey to understand this, how we could transform data into actual knowledge, I actually came upon a paper by Nathan Shedroff, which was in a very completely different discipline. But for me, it sort of distilled down the 4 key areas we need to focus on. And that was data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And there's various actors involved, those producing that data and information, as well as consumers. And they have very different levels of connection, if you like, to that information or engagement. And critically, of course, when we're talking about soil is really the land manager is the key person who manages the soil. And increasingly, we're noticing that the connection to historical data collection is less. So we wanted to see how we could increase that transformation, if you like, of data and information to knowledge. And knowledge really is only gained through experiences. And those experiences could be passive or they're active experiences, but they in turn create that wisdom. And it's only really on that reflection of what you've undertaken that you understand what it can lead to in the future. Next slide, please. Sorry. I keep doing. So with Australia, it's interesting to note that the UK's journey actually in knowing what our soils are was very similar. The CSIRO led the soil surveying of Australia, mostly at regional scales and with accompanying analytical data. And most of that data was digitised in the 1980s, and soil data can be arranged as polygons or data points. The outcome of that relationship with CSIRO largely leading it was to engage with state and territory agencies, and they produced a nationally wide Australian Soil Resource Information System. That is only, that was been around for some time, but in 2014 was the last time it was updated. And it was a new national system was launched in 2023, which is the Australian National Soil Information System. So parallel to this national system is also several different state and territories gather their own soil data and information and in various layers. But they all have very different ways of connecting to it. And in some cases, in some states, that data has been archived and is no longer available to people. Next slide, please. So this is showing you in New South Wales in Australia, and over many years, they've collected various types of information. So this is showing you, and most of this data was collected in very different programs. So what you can see here is that the collection is quite patchy, it's probably variable in quality, and the governance of that data is quite fragmented. So soil maps, as we know, are not meant to date. We don't want them to date because we want them to be useful for a long period of time. But it's interesting to note that there's a much more contemporary interest in soil health, which does require more frequent soil monitoring and hopefully a baseline to establish those trend lines. The other thing you might not realise is that the state of New South Wales in Australia can hold the UK up to 4 times. So we're dealing with large areas as well. And the mapping scales, which you can see here, are actually too coarse for the scale required for farm management. Next slide, please. So the ANSYS, which is the newest version of the National Soil Information System, is interesting because it actually acts as a data warehouse. It doesn't actually hold any information itself. There will be some new information going into it at some point, but if someone's interested in some of these data points, they have to request them, and then depending on the data sharing arrangements, they will be accessed through the various portals or different states and then delivered to the client. But what the client gets, or the person asked for this, is actually no interpretation or explanation of the data supplied, and there's really no interactive learning experiences, and importantly, no management data of the soil. So as you can see here, ANSYS is a point scale information, and it's really interesting to note that ANSYS, when they were putting this together, rejected over 30,000 soil profiles because there was no records of the analytical methods attached to that data collection. So the CSIRO, in their new national monitoring scheme, want to capture data at a very high level, very high standard, and they are going to be taking 3,000 new sampling points, largely in agricultural regions, and there'll be over 30,000 samples being collected over a period of time. And this will take, 5 years in a rolling monitoring program. In a recent webinar, though, with an audience, it was interesting to note that CSIRO said they were still unclear as how they would visualise this soil information for a farmer audience. Next slide, please. So critically, how are we going to turn this existing soil data into soil knowledge for land management? the type of information we currently have available on soil types and their behaviour is limited. And if we look at a public soil repository, the data is not really linked to soil function or soil management. So if a farmer wants to change something, they're not really sure how it's going to impact on their soil type. So there's a lot of data on mostly chemical soil properties, a little data on soil physical and biological properties, no information on observational indicators for soil monitoring, soil information collected outside the production zone to benchmark soil change is actually rare. So soil samples are taken sparsely and at shallow depth and not characterising the whole soil profile as we see on this slide. And interestingly, most soil data points have not been revisited to look at trends or impacts of land management on soil properties. And largely, I think this is a function of funding. You know, these things are not funded in a very short-term way. And ANSYS that I talked about in the previous slide has only 5 years of funding to do the next round. Next slide, please. So data, I think, is not accessible until it's actually organised, transformed, and presented in ways that give it meaning. And this is especially important for us to understand what is the audience's need to build these meaningful engagement experiences, because it's only through these experiences that people start to embed it in their own practice. And we have to consider what makes information accessible in terms of language, the digital literacy of the audience, the relevance, and the coverage. We tend to focus on data being more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That's just about the data, but not in terms of the products we produce for the different audiences we have. So this is actually the front face of New South Wales data. It's called eSpade, and it holds data collected over several decades, quite a long period of time, as 60,000 soil profiles. They're through government activities, they're through research projects. It even has some landholders' data in a research project. But if you live in this area circled by red, the most information you have is what you've collected yourself or your own local soil information. But if you're living here, you have a lot more accessible information. So you have a soil map that has been made. You have actual points characterizing the soil types, which are in the legend here. And you would also, if you clicked on a polygon, you would get a description of that soil landscape layer. The other thing that I haven't shown here is that you could turn on a land capability layer, which I feel does offer an interpretable layer, because this interpretable layer sets out for people what is the most limiting soil property for particular forms of agriculture. So it has done the work for you. It has interpreted what the soil data can tell you about your soil. Next slide, please. So I actually wanted to put in something from Scotland. So here we have Soil Finder, and this is something that has been built up over a long period as well. And it shows a polygon map, and you can click on a point and you can graph various soil properties, and you can look at how the carbon changes down the soil profile. And I know from using this or trying to use this that you can actually link to external documents which give you greater guidance. And it is freely available through a web mapping service of the Scotland's Environmental Web. So it does offer some additional information if you're willing to go and look for it. Next slide, please. Now, I think one of the issues we also we need to consider is that there's an ageing workforce both in agriculture and the service industries that support them. And it also raises a question about who will be training the currently employed extension and project staff in project roles. It's interesting to also note that farmers both here in Australia and in the UK are on average older than, they're around 60, but they're also staying in farming for longer than the conventional workforce. So a quarter of Australian farmers are still farming over 65, and in the UK it's even higher, so 40%. This demographic profiling, if you like, of farmers and scientists does give us a window into what is their information requirements, but also what is their level of digital literacy, because it will be less in older farmers. But also we've got to capture the benefit of this, the fact that these people have been farming on an average for 37 years, and that is a wealth of experience as well. The other point I wanted to make quickly is that soil scientists, there's very few employed in the extension in Australia. This is in the extension area, and even less in teaching. So there's a lack of investment in those areas. Thank you. Next slide. I wanted to also raise, where do we place human capital to ensure more engagement and investment in sustainable soil management? We often place engagement at the end of a research project after we've developed the ideas. And these images may be familiar to many of us, where we take our research and present it to an interested public or community. But in actual fact, this top left picture is a farmer talking to a whole group of soil scientists about his farming management and how he looks after his soil, and actually what sort of soil information he uses on a regular basis. So I think we need to do more of this type of flipping, if you like, talking to farmers first to understand what their problems are, and how they've actually tried to address them already, and then do the development of the research. Oh, next slide, please. Sorry. I keep forgetting I've not got control. Yeah. And the other one is really that social network. So how is information going to be connected to various audiences? And where do they get their information from, which is important to consider. And these two, this graph and the table shows you people that are adopting minimum tillage and what characterises them. And most of these people are seeking a paid advice and also a member of local groups. And on this side, you can see that most farmers, when they're trying to source information, are going to other farmers. So up to 60% are finding their information from other farmers, and less so reaching out to, say, a natural resource management organisation or Landcare. Next slide, please. Now, I quickly inserted this. It's not from my paper, but it does give you some idea about the importance of advisors. So an agronomist is more likely to interpret the results of a soil test for a farmer, and this was in New South Wales and Queensland. And even though these farmers were quite confident on their knowledge of soil, they were less likely to interpret the results on their own. Next slide, please. So what I would like to argue is that, there are pros and cons to face-to-face connections and online connections, but increasingly I think we need to maintain this hybrid model. They both do require the human capital to be sustained and supported, and I think sometimes this is a difficult issue because there's a lot of burnout in maintaining social groups face-to-face. But also in even an online environment, you require a very dedicated team to curate, organise and respond to any inquiries. So I think the value of these both is that they have, this is where my thing moved, is that they have different pros and cons, and they also have, like in the face-to-face, it may take longer, but they have that greater immediacy and connection to those communities. So the next slide, please. Thanks. So when I was examining all these various soil data repositories in the UK and Australia, it became very apparent to me, and when I was looking at them, that how we frame the soil data portals and information systems needs to be more aligned to the intended user. And so if we don't concentrate on these first two steps, like determining the purpose and audience needs and identifying and matching soil information needs, we're very unlikely to achieve the third step, which is facilitating that knowledge exchange. And importantly, by facilitating the knowledge exchange, you're applying some of those principles and strategies and ensuring that there are actually opportunities to have those engaging experiences with knowledge, and also the time to actually reflect on how they went. We're not going to achieve the sort of desired soil and social outcomes we want. And alongside this, of course, is importantly how we adapt and establish our governance arrangements to look after the soil data and information we're collecting. So last slide, or nearly last slide, next slide, thanks. So hopefully these are some of the outcomes we're looking at to hopefully potentially achieve these. We want a greater utilisation of local soil knowledge, that improved information exchange, invigorated social networks that will support the generation of actionable knowledge, and to achieve that single, double and triple loop learning to lead to more positive behaviour and practice change. So that we have better traceability and legitimacy of outcomes, and ultimately improved soil stewardship, and will contribute to improved soil condition and soil protection. So that's a lot. I think there's one more slide, but that's just my contacts if you're interested to talk to me. And again, many thanks to Katrine for helping me with writing this paper. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. Another really interesting talk. So that's both of our presenters, and now we move on to the question and answer portion of the webinar. I'm quite conscious that I know that Olivia needs to leave reasonably quickly, so I think we might start.
Maybe she could go first.
A couple of questions for her that have come through. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. If you still have questions to put in, please put them in. So we have a question about which mechanism you think is more influential in terms of carbon storage in the situations you're talking about. So is it physical protection or the chemical interactions with the actual soil minerals?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's a genuinely a very interesting and contested question in soil carbon science right now. And the honest answer is that, the field has shifted its views considerably in the last 15 years. The current evidence suggests chemical stabilization through organo-mineral associations is more important for long-term carbon persistence. The carbon bonded to mineral surfaces is the carbon that stays for centuries. Physical protection in aggregates matters, but it operates on shorter timescales. What our data shows is that in young woodland, physical aggregation drives the initial carbon response. You see it immediately in the macro aggregate fraction. But in ancient woodland, you start to see the fingerprint of mineral stabilization developing alongside it. So the two mechanisms operate in different timescales, and a complete picture of woodland soil carbon needs to account for both. Yeah, I think I answered the question.
Absolutely, thank you very much. It kind of leads on to our second question, although this may be slightly out of your comfort zone. So we've got a question here about whether we can extrapolate the work you've done in forestry to sort of a more arable setting, and whether permanent net carbon storage in soil in arable land is likely to be quite complicated or even unrealistic.
The short answer is yes. Maybe a longer answer would be that I think our data support to a degree of skepticism about large-scale permanent carbon sequestration for arable land. The mechanisms that make woodland accumulation or carbon accumulation so striking is the developing of organic layer, the progressive mineral stabilization over centuries, the undisturbed soil architecture. So these are structurally absent from arable systems. You can gain carbon in arable soils through better management, and that's genuinely worth doing. But our woodland chronosequence shows that the really significant stable carbon gains take decades to centuries of relatively undisturbed soil development. So any policy framework that treats arable soil carbon credits as equivalent to that needs to be looked at very carefully.
Okay, that's fantastic. So we do have sort of some slightly wider questions about sort of the policy of rushing towards climate mitigation using non-native conifers, and suggesting that the 40-year rotation model might result in carbon losses rather than long-term carbon gains. And why do you think that that's still a policy goal? Or do you think that's still a policy goal? In Scotland, I guess.
Oh, sorry, was this question for me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not very sure about what the policy says in that respect. So the question was if the conifer is still a good...
Yeah, so I think given your results, you show that in the shorter term in a forestry timescale, you might have steady or even a decrease in soil carbon. So should we be moving towards preserving ancient woodland, or perhaps looking at mixed native hardwoods rather than continual conifer rotations?
It always depends on your goal, isn't it? The case of the study we did, it was all broadleaf woodland. I don't have the detail about conifer, but from background research, I know that in terms of carbon gains, a mixed forest is preferable to a single species forest in the terms of, conifer versus mixed or broadleafed. The carbon gains are different. And that is also because of the type of the composition, the type of litter that accumulates in those systems that are completely different. Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think I'm beginning to run out of
questions on the chat. But again, if you have some more questions, I think we might have to say thank you to Olivia.